Hello and welcome to Eyes on Research, the podcast that digests the latest scientific innovations in eye research using simple and understandable terms. I am your host, Thales Guimarães, medical doctor and clinician scientist at Moorfields Eye Hospital. Welcome to another episode of this podcast. I am very happy for having you here with me today because I'm truly passionate by the topics we'll be discussing. Today we'll be talking about the genetics of eye color. Beyond genetics, we'll be discussing a bit about theory of color, color vision, and other cool stuff about this property of vision. After the social media trend we have all seen in 2015, by the way, hashtag the dress, with some people seeing the dress colors as blue and black and others as gold and white, it became clear how color perception involves concepts of psychology, optics, and physics in general. But let's start from the beginning. So, eye color, or a more precise way to define it, iris color, which is the structure that gives the color of the eyes, is used in basic science as an example of a recessive trait. We learned the model outlined by Davenport in a scientific paper published in the journal Science in 1904. That's more than 100 years ago. So the author suggests that blue is recessive, a brown eye color is always dominant to blue, with two blue-eyed parents always producing a blue-eyed child. In genetics, we would commonly refer to the brown eye as the dominant or the wild type. And this works just fine most of the time. You can trace entire pedigrees and very big family trees following this inheritance pattern, particularly if you consider the main blue eye gene, named OCA2, which is a gene located in chromosome 15. This is a recessive gene, meaning you need two copies of the mutated gene, one coming from your mother and the other one coming from your father, to have blue eyes. Now, this model goes downhill when we consider that there are cases of two parents with blue eyes that have children or offspring, as we typically say in genetics, with brown eyes. The truth is that this is a rather simplistic model, should I say, and that does not convey well the fact that eye color is a complex genetic trait, meaning that many genes are involved in this process, with interactions of some major genes and many minor genes. Furthermore, there are many intermediate variations within this spectrum, such as hazel, green, going all the way to albino in the far side of this. So, how do we explain this? So, the question is, what is the color of your eye? You'd be surprised if you ask this to five different people, as you may get five different answers. Well, the trichromatic theory of color vision, which was postulated by Thomas Young and Hermann von Helmholtz in the 19th century, suggests we can define all perceived colors as a mixture of red, blue, and green. There's absolutely no consistency whatsoever in the definition of eye color. And there are challenges to describe color across different cultures as well. Essentially, color can be described in three characteristics, let's say. It can be described in terms of hue, saturation, and brightness. Hue being the dominant wavelength of the visible spectrum, saturation meaning the amount of light that's mixed in within hue, and brightness being the intensity of light. But color is actually a perception rather than a physical property of light. So if you were to give a more specific definition of color, is that color is a visual perception based on the electromagnetic spectrum. So even though color is not an inherent property of matter, color perception is related to an object's light absorption, reflection, its emission spectra, and interference between different wavelengths. For humans, colors are perceived in the visible light spectrum with three types of pigments, which we named opsins. These are present in the cone cells, and hence you have the name trichromacy, which essentially means three colors. These are the long wavelength or red, medium wavelength or green, and short wavelength or blue. So for all artists out there, RGB, right? So when you're using Photoshop, that's essentially what you're doing. You're messing with these colors to get different hues. Other animals may have a different number of cone cells or have eyes that are sensitive to different wavelengths, such as the bee, which is one that comes to mind right now. They can distinguish ultraviolet rays, and thus they have a different color sensitivity range. Animal perception of color originates from different light wavelengths or spectral sensitivity in cone cell types. And the way that we see is that this is then processed by the brain. These are some of the basics that we need to know about color perception. Now, coming back to the eye color, right? The main pigment that we have in the eye is called melanin, which is a dark brown pigment. So, how do we get blue eyes if we do not have blue pigment in the eye? What happens is that light is scattered by the opaque layers in the iris, with blue being more scattered than red. This is called the Tyndall effect, which is the same phenomenon that explains why the sky is blue, where light is scattered by particles in the atmosphere. A blue iris then is an example of a structural color rather than a pigment color. So brown irises, they have the same layers but more melanin, and they appear brown. Whereas in the complete absence of melanin, such as the case as albinism, the iris appears red from the red of the retina. Now, moving away from the simple model of blue being recessive and brown being dominant, we know now that the formation and the deposition of pigment is a multi-step pathway, and thus it is possible to be recessive at different steps of this pathway, which explain how it is possible for two parents with oculocutaneous albinism, for instance, to have normally pigmented offspring. If one parent had mutations in a gene named OCA1, which is the tyrosinase gene, which participates in an early stage of pigment formation, and the other parent had mutations in another gene related to the pigment pathway, OCA2, for example, then they would not be recessive for the same gene. Hence, the children would be unaffected carriers, meaning they would carry one single copy of the mutation in two different genes. They do not get a double dose, they do not get the disease. And remember, it's not only genetics, right? Environmental factors also influence eye colors. So parents know for a long time now that babies' eyes can darken with age. A study conducted in California with around 200 newborns has shown that brown was less likely to change over time and that there was a higher frequency of change from blue to non-blue iris. Other external factors associated with eye age are infections, for instance. So the herpetic iritis, which is an inflammation in the iris caused by infection of the herpes simplex virus, can result in loss of pigmentation, causing light colored tissues in some sectors of the iris. So, moving forward to the dress, how did we actually develop color vision? So, evolutionary theory tells us that this must have been advantageous to primates. It is thought that color vision was an advantage for the long range detection of young leaves or ripe fruits, for instance, which may flush a bright red in the tropics and are a crucial food resource when fruit is scarce. So, this would give them a tremendous advantage because they would be able to see these ripe fruits because of this color perception, and they would have a higher survivability rate. It's as simple as that. Coming back to the dress now. In 2015, this went viral. Remember? There was a huge discussion whether this dress was white and gold or blue and black. Spoiler alert, in case you didn't know, it's been 7 years now, but in case you didn't know, it was blue and black. There were a range of explanations for this phenomenon involving the concept of color constancy, genetic contributions, and environmental experiences. However, no theory is available to explain this optical illusion. There were some assumptions about the illumination of the dress and how it would affect the subjective interpretation of observers. Remember, color is a perception rather than a physical property of light. Hence, the perception of the colors in that dress may be guided by the interpretation of that scene and the inferred positions of light sources. So, a very interesting research paper published in the journal Perception, that's the name of the journal, in 2016, suggests that people who perceive the dress as blue and black are 2 times more likely to consider the light source coming from the front than those who see the dress white and gold. Similarly, the environmental lighting conditions of who was observing may also have been important in perceiving the dress color. So, what was your light source when you were looking at this? In summary, there's a wide range of mechanisms and particularities involved both in the color of our eyes and how color is perceived in general. Hence, I'll leave you with one question for reflection. What is the color of your eyes? Thank you for listening to me, and I hope to see you in the next episode.